We have officially gotten some insight on the Za'Darius Smith situation, according to Dan Miller, and also contract details have started to come into play. So let's get right into it. So I saw this news this morning, and apparently there's going to be more details on this. Maybe by the time you're seeing it, you see more details on this. I guess it's going to be on the local news in Detroit, where they speak on the Za'Darius Smith situation. According to Dan Miller, they give us a little nugget this morning that I saw, and I was like, you know what, this might be worth doing a quick little video on. But also because we got a lot of the details on the recent contracts, it's something that we can also quickly touch on in a short little video today. But Dan Miller posted this morning, Brad Holmes on Za'Darius Smith says they just couldn't afford him based on their current situation and what's coming down the road. To me, that's the key of this. We'll get to that here in a second. They are staying in touch with his agent. Felt like he played good snaps for them last year. Much more coming on Fox 2 News at 5 and 6. So maybe we'll get some more details on the whole situation. I don't know, but I did see this, and I was like, all right, this is worth making a video on. First off, that last part about good snaps from him this past season, I think that is important. Okay, he was a good pass rusher for us this past season. I did talk about as a run defender. I didn't think he necessarily made us better, but for his price point, it was very reasonable for the production that you were going to get, even if you didn't cut him and try to bring him back on a new contract. Even the deal that he essentially had, which was basically a one-year, $11 million deal, $5 million in void money this next season. So it's essentially a one-year, $11 million deal just spread over 2 seasons. That was a reasonable price point for the production that you were getting as a pass rusher, 40 pressures just as a Lion alone after the trade. So for me, the price point wasn't a bad price point in theory. But for the Lions situation, according to Dan Miller here, it was just something that they didn't feel like they could afford. Now, I think simply put, first off, the fact that he had over $5 million in dead money next season is the biggest part of this. Having that dead money just sitting there, that if you didn't rework the contract by essentially cutting him and then bringing him back on a new deal, didn't make a ton of sense for the Lions because of where their 2026 salary cap is set to be. Now, we don't know what that number is going to look like because we don't know what the number is going to be set at, how much the Lions are going to roll over. We don't know a lot of those details, but we do know the Lions are currently right now set for the 26th most cap space this next season, and that's because a lot of these large cap hits are going to start to come into play. And we already did a video about the tough decisions the Lions are going to have to make. They have a really kind of an in-between. If they have a lot of their big contracts, which are their starters, these are the big money guys that they want to keep around their draft picks, and then there's a lot of minimum type of contracts that kind of support the rest of the roster, whether that's a draft pick, which are actually some of our more expensive contracts now, or if it's just a player signing on a one-year deal, because for both sides, it makes sense to do that. There's not a lot of starting opportunities available for each side. And then for the Lions' perspective, signing multi-year deals that you have to get out of becomes a problem because the Lions need to avoid that kind of dead money. The dead money that they're going to be taking on is mainly going to be, hopefully, just the void years that they set into these contracts to make sure that their plan continues to work and that they can keep this window open. That way they're not pulling a Philadelphia Eagles where literally all their dead money is in 2029. They just have $200 million sitting there. Lions are trying to avoid that. But we'll dive into this more in a second. That first off was the biggest thing. It was like, hey, if you cut him, there's no dead money. You get out from that number for next season. You don't have a lot of cap space already next year. You're probably going to have to start restructuring deals unless that cap number just takes off by like $100 million or something, which it did grow by 9.3% this year, but that is only $23.8 million. Now, that's not a bad number, but to put that in perspective, if Za'Darius is about 6 of that, that's a pretty good chunk of what the salary cap space went up for this past season. So it was a pretty big number, and that was the biggest problem with this current deal. It wasn't that it was like, oh, 1 year, that's $5 million. That's not affordable. It was the second year that was added to it. But now you start to look at the idea of what Brad Holmes is talking about, and I think it does make a lot of sense. So we keep in mind that we don't have a lot of salary cap space set for this next season because we have a lot of these big deals kicking in for the Lions. You looked at it just for the 2025 season, you would notice that, the Lions do have a lot of cap space right now. $43 million, according to Spotrac, is the Lions cap space because of the top 51 cutoff. We actually have some players that were recent additions that have now fallen under the top 51 cutoff. $43 million, the fourth most cap space right now. Only guy that's not included is KO. Also have 74 players under contract. So they've really filled out this roster with a lot of these contracts, as we'll see. There are a lot of one-year deals. At $43 million is going to be important. It's not that the Lions necessarily would need that for this season. Talked about coming into the offseason, I thought the Lions' value would be that they could give out one-year deals because they had money right now. It's about the future that they had to be prepared for. And that's what I think is the most important part about this comment from Dan Miller. And to make it make sense, first off, as we know, we have to spend 90% of the salary cap over a 4-year span. Whatever that 4-year span is, we have to do it over that 4-year span. The Lions are currently right now somewhere about in the 85% of spending salary cap. Now, that doesn't mean they have to do it this year. They have to get the 90. It's just in that 4-year span they have to. And I think the Lions, maybe very much so projecting that, hey, next year we're going to be really tight on that salary cap. Like there's a real good chance that whatever we have, or maybe we only spent 86% or 87% this year, next year that extra couple percent that we have, we're going to spend. So it's going to work its way back into that threshold of back into the 90%. Like we have to get there, and it'll probably get there pretty easily because of where our cap number is set. And then you think about the rollover cap. Rollover cap can be very important for the Lions next season as well, understanding that they need some money that they can push into next year from this year's cap space because they're not set to have a lot of cap. And all of that's, of course, set on the cap number. If the cap number doesn't grow at all, which I don't know what the Lions projections are, I would assume that they're projecting it to grow. That would be a little bit of a problem as well. So we're going to have to use a lot of this as rollover cap, which we've done into next season to kind of open up our cap space a little bit more again. And that's where our flexibility will come from. Is this is an opportunity this year that the Lions don't have to, completely shoot the salary cap and then have nothing pushing into next season. That'd be a tough spot, and we'd be very reliant on restructuring contracts, and then also the fact of what does that salary cap number get to. Now, a large portion of this sort of unknown is how much can the Lions actually roll over into next season based on how much they spent towards the cap over that 4-year span. I don't know the exact window, so I'm not really sure where the Lions are at with that number as a whole. But if they can roll over a lot of this cap space, saving money for now does make sense because you're going to spend a lot of the cap next year. But if the Lions are unable to roll over a majority of this cap and they actually need to spend some of the money, then going back to a Za'Darius Smith contract, putting a lot of that number into this year would make sense because they could still hit that number while saving money for next year, and saving that $5+ million for next year that you cut him on would also make sense because now you're hitting your threshold, which you have to, but you're also still, again, keeping money away from those future years, which is a really big part of this. Could be. Rollover caps will be very beneficial for the Lions next season. And then you look at Za'Darius Smith. It's not that the Lions couldn't afford it. It's not that they couldn't bring him back. I mean, they could technically bring him back for a 1-year, $10 million deal if they wanted to. They could pull that off, and they could put it all into this year. It would just limit that rollover cap. We also have to account for the draft, which, will be very manageable, right? It'll be very manageable because the draft picks that we have, very manageable there. And we keep in mind, while it's projected at $8.5 million according to Over the Cap, which where our current picks are, if the Lions trade up, that could become more expensive. Trade down, it could be less expensive depending on how many picks we have as well. But also the top 51 cutoff means that some of those later picks won't even count towards the top 51 once you include them to the salary cap room, especially if you keep some of those 7th rounders. Of course, UDFAs and some of the guarantees that you end up getting there, maybe some of them getting to the top 51, maybe not. Of course, you want to have salary cap during the season as well for flexibility to make moves during the season. Heck, maybe that's a trade that you want to take on. You have that cap space now you could take on as a Za'Darius Smith contract. So there's also that element as well as just having flexibility during the season. Lions are going to have all those things. But the thing with Za'Darius Smith is here, and understanding that the Lions felt like, okay, we didn't have that money because, again, looking down the road, the Lions maybe didn't feel like they were comfortable with keeping that deal of basically a 1-year, $11 million deal spread out over 2 seasons, tells me that a new deal for Za'Darius Smith, as it says that they are still in contact with his agent, would likely have to be, I would think, somewhere between close to half of that for a new deal for Za'Darius. And it does feel very difficult to actually get that done. Like if you look at it, a 1-year, $11 million deal, like I said, for his production is incredibly fair. This would have to be something where he's probably just taking less money to come back to be with the Lions again. Because if you look at some of the edge contracts that were given out this year, Baron Browning is getting $7.5 million per year, right? Which is more than, of course, on a 2-year, $15 million deal. Browning did not have the production. He also got traded this past season. Wasn't that productive after he got traded to Arizona, and he was brought back. Joseph Osai got $6.5 million. He had some production, but he played a ton of snaps, right? It wasn't on the Za'Darius Smith level. He was someone I was interested in, but he got $6.5 million essentially coming back on a prove-it deal for them this offseason. And Shoyinka, who made nearly $5 million, $4.75 million, with $4.2 million of that guaranteed. It's nearly all guaranteed for him on a 1-year deal, and that guy essentially had no production this past season. So you are getting really strong contracts. So to think that Za'Darius Smith would come back on a 1-year, $7 million deal based on what we're seeing production-wise, it doesn't really add up. That would be him truly saying, I just want to be back with this team, because from production perspective, it doesn't make any sense. The guy that I think is interesting is DeMarcus Lawrence. DeMarcus Lawrence is getting $10.8 million this year, who's not coming off a productive season, $10.8 million per year on a 3-year deal. Now, only 13 of that is guaranteed. That's nearly half of that contract, 13 guaranteed. So if you think about a Za'Darius deal, realistically, maybe if you had Za'Darius on a 1-year, $7 million, from our perspective, that could make sense. You could keep the money out of next season. You could take that on for this year. Yes, it does take away a little bit from that rollover as long as you're hitting that threshold, because I don't think the Lions will have any problem with doing that going forward in future years, which is why they're saying, okay, let's hang back a little bit this season. There's no need to just be spending money all over the place. But a 1-year, $7 million, $3 million guaranteed, that just doesn't feel realistic for the production that Za'Darius Smith can still bring to the table. If the Lions are essentially unwilling to roll a 1-year, $11 million deal, my guess would be it'd have to be significantly less than $10 million, and you'd probably have to make almost all of it guaranteed on a 1 year type of deal to align for both sides. If that's 1 year, $7 million, pretty much fully guaranteed would be the kind of thing. Now that could still be looked at as low for Za'Darius, no question, but that might be the best way to make it happen. And you utilize the guarantees to incentivize him to come back, even though it's a 1 year deal. So I think them being in contact is also like, hey, he would have to want to come back and maybe take less money than what he could go get elsewhere. Because if you just go by production, I got to believe there's a team that's willing to pay a pass rusher, because everybody wants pass rushers, more money than that. So it's going to make the situation of getting Za'Darius Smith back pretty difficult, I think, for the Lions this offseason. I do like to hear that they're still in contact. I'd love to have him back, but I think it makes a ton of sense. Just because the Lions have cap space now, you have to look at it from the future perspective. As we talked about, the Lions are trying to keep this window open, and they're not trying to keep this window open by giving, having a huge void here where everybody needs to reset. They're trying to pay these guys as they go so that they can make this consistent and stable. And now we're seeing it by the other contracts as the Lions have given out this offseason. So a lot of the updated deals that we have, Kyle Allen, a $1.13 million cap hit with a $100K guarantee. We got Avonte Maddox, a $1.19 million cap hit. Now he has basically fully guaranteed on that deal, but it's a really low cap hit. Rock Ya-Sin, I think he kind of signed like that veteran minimum type of deal where he ends up getting more money than essentially what it's going to count towards the cap at the 1.03 million, similar to what we did with Will Harris. I think he did the same thing over 4+ years of experience in the NFL. Kenny Yeboah, similar type of deal to Avonte Maddox, 1.19 million. The only difference is 482K is guaranteed of that contract. You have Muhammad, who has now recently signed back. 917K is guaranteed, so much more guaranteed of his $1.19 million deal. Now, Grant Stewart actually got a little bit of a nicer deal, 1.7 million, pretty much fully guaranteed for Grant Stewart. And then you have Patrick, 2.5 million, which is basically what the projections were this offseason. That's exactly what he got. 2.5 million, essentially fully guaranteed for Tim Patrick. All these 1 year deals. Miles Adams, $1.1 million deal. Seemingly like there's going to be no dead cap there. You'll be able to get off that deal. So it's kind of just a true prove it deal, like bring him back for this offseason, that kind of thing. We'll see how he competes. Pat O'Connor, $1.13 million. You have 300K guaranteed. KO'd hasn't been listed yet, but that's where the Lions are at with all of these new deals. Very short term, 1 year deals. Really low cap hits. They're trying to keep their cap space in a really good spot for this year, I believe, so that they can roll it over next year, knowing that they're going to be pushing up on that number even with the rollover money because of all the new numbers that they have to give out, because of these cap hits, and then all of these extensions that are also still coming down the road. And as these things start to kick in, this is how the Lions are going to have to be. They have to be smart. So I don't think this is as much about right now. The Lions can't afford it. They definitely can't afford it right now, but they're looking into the future and trying to balance what makes sense. And they don't want to go over the top with that. I do understand it. So could a deal get done here with Za'Darius? I think so, but it's probably pretty clearly going to have to be less than what the 1 year, $11 million deal. Now, how they set it up, I don't think is super important, right? If you spread it into next year, I just don't think the Lions want to give out a long-term deal, which makes the flexibility difficult. I don't think they want to give out a 3 year deal to Za'Darius Smith because they don't want to be in that spot. They don't think that's necessary. They'd probably prefer a 1 year deal. But the problem is that limits flexibility because now it's either you're putting into this year or next year as void money. It's one of the two. It's going in one of the two ways. So either way, which is like, hey, you can pay it this year. Just take away from that rollover. Yeah, you're just rolling over less money. If you put it in the next year, okay, it just takes away from next year's cap. You roll over money to pay for that. So ultimately, I don't think it matters too much. I think the reality is it's going to be tough to find a deal that he's going to want to accept and feel like he's worth. That being said, though, because of what we know. We kind of know now Lions aren't going to pay 1 year, $11 million for the guy. He does just want to come back and play with the Lions again, as he made clear on Instagram, and he feels like he's getting enough value for a new deal Lions could offer him down the road. Maybe it does happen. I'm still open to having him back. Lions' new contract situations have been updated. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you, Prop, for watching, and I'm out.